Welcome to Everything Co-op, bringing you information on how cooperatives can help improve your quality of life. This show is being sponsored by the National Co-op Bank, NCB. The NCB is dedicated to strengthening communities nationwide for the delivery of banking and financial services for the nation's cooperatives, their members, and other socially responsible organizations. For more information on the power of community ownership, visit ncb.coop. That's ncb.coop. Now stay tuned for your host, Vernon Oakes.
Good morning, everybody. This is Vernon Oakes. Welcome to Everything Co-op, and we're having a wonderful, wonderful day today. And we have some excellent guests on the line. We have Mr. Michael Peck with One Worker, One Vote, and we have Mr. Conaty, who is the associate of the co-ops in the UK, and Dr. Julian Manley, who's chair of the Preston Cooperative Development Network. And I know Mr. Conaty has dropped, so hopefully the technology will get there and he'll come back on. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning, Vernon. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you guys so very much for being on. So let me get started with Mike. Would you tell us what is One Worker, One Vote, and this sort of, how do you get the unions to work with cooperatives? How does that work?
Well, certainly. Well, Vernon, you remember a year ago this past December when you came down to Cincinnati to see the Cincinnati Union Cooperative Initiative, its third nationwide symposium. We had over 250 people there, practitioners of the union co-op model from all over the country. This is a model that was created by the Steelworkers Union, by the Ohio Employee Ownership Center, and by Mondragon International. The authors of it are Rob Witherall, who's an organizer, a first-rate organizer for the Steelworkers, and Chris Cooper, who is a principal in the Ohio Employee Ownership Center in Kent University in Ohio, and one of the foremost cooperative developers in the country. And this model essentially took a worker cooperative, a Mondragon cooperative, and it split out the social committee of the Mondragon Cooperative. You know, Mondragon Cooperatives are on a principle of one worker, one vote. That's how we got the name for our organization here in the U.S. And one worker, one vote, democratic capitalism, a whole 10 different principles for how to maintain cooperative principles and democratic capitalism and cooperative practices. And what Mondragon and the Steelworkers did was they split out the social committee, which is a committee that, if nothing else works in any other system to resolve disputes, you have a social committee that elevates the problem right up to the top. And we slid that out, and we slid back in a progressive collective bargaining agreement, such as we would find here in the United States. And voila, the union cooperative model was born. We've tested it all over the country. We have examples of union co-ops now all over the country in all sorts of industries. And the model has received a lot of interest, and its usage is growing. And what's interesting now is the model has jumped the Atlantic and is now being looked at seriously by the UK, by the leaders of the cooperative movement and the unions there. And situated in that is what Dr. Julian Manley represents with the Preston model, which is one of the leading application in the UK for Mondragon principles and practices, and very close in industrial tenor and framework and allegiance to those Mondragon principles of our Cincinnati Union Cooperative Initiative. So the ecosystem, Vernon, that you saw, right up front and personal in Cincinnati, is really an example, although in a different localized sense, as Julian will explain, what's happening in Preston.
That was my second trip. I've been there 2 of the 3 years, and I went back because I really love the work that you are doing and how it magnifies this work of the cooperative with merging and marrying with the unions. Dr. Julian Manley, I looked at the map. I see that Preston is about a 2-hour drive north of London.
Yeah, if you go fast, yeah.
if you go fast. Well, the map I'm looking at says 2 hours, 10 minutes, and I was wondering how you could go that fast. But up close to Liverpool, or you have to go through Liverpool to get there. Just wanted people to get a sense of where Preston is.
Yeah, Preston's in the northwest of England. It's round about the midway between north and south, really. So it's kind of in the belly button of England. North of Manchester. Manchester's the nearest biggest city to Preston. And, of course, Preston is just 50 minutes drive away from Rochdale, which is where the Rochdale pioneers began the whole cooperative movement. So, maybe there's some resonance there, too.
So this sort of relationship between the U.S. and the UK, there's been lots of relationships through the years, and I guess this would be a great place for us to work together. I've talked about the abolitionists, I want to say Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass went to England. He went to England, Great Britain, and Ireland as a slave, and he worked there and got donations from cooperatives, and he came back a freedman. So there's a lot of history, and this was in the mid-1800s. There's a lot of history between cooperators in the UK and in the US. So what are you doing in Preston?
Well, as Michael was saying, in Preston, we're very interested in the Mondragon model of cooperatives. In Mondragon, in the Basque Country, in the north of Spain, they have this organization of cooperatives where they've got major industrial cooperatives that are interlinked with each other and work along the principle of intercooperation. And those cooperatives have a particular form of governance, which we're very interested in. And they're cooperatives based, as Michael was saying, on one worker, one vote. One worker, one vote, whatever the status of the worker, whatever the income of the worker. So it's true democracy at work. And furthermore, those workers all own their own place of work. So we're very interested in that in the UK. In the UK, we're suffering models of austerity here, and we've got great economic and political problems. I don't know how much of this you're aware of in the States, but for example, at the moment we're in the midst of the United Kingdom leaving the European Union.
Yeah, you're talking about Brexit, right?
Brexit, that's correct, yeah. And in the face of austerity, in the face of the financial collapse in 2008, and faced now with Brexit, the people of Preston have decided, principally led by the local city council, but supported by the university and communities, decided to take some action which will re-empower people to build up their own wealth. And when I say wealth, I mean social capital as well as financial capital, and to move out of the austerity and the problems that bind us. So we're taking on board the Mondragon example. We're finding ways of developing worker-owned cooperatives, and we're finding ways of increasing local procurement so that wealth can be developed locally and it can be retained locally. And as a result of that, we can sustain and develop new employment. And all of that is within the framework of cooperative working and, the cooperative principles and values that govern how people work together and how they relate to each other in community. And what we found so interesting about Michael's work and the work of One Worker, One Vote and the Cincinnati example is that Michael is well aware of the advantages of the Mondragon model, but he's also well aware of how this model has to be adapted to the circumstances of in Michael's case, the USA, and in our case, the UK. And one of those circumstances is how do we manage to work with the unions? Just as in the US and the UK, the unions have a very noble position and a long history and a genuine worker representation. So we want to find a model that is as close as possible to the Mondragon model, but responds to the situation in our country, which means taking care of union representation and the role of union with workers. And so the idea of having the Mondragon structure of governance and replacing the social committee with the social council, in the Mondragon example, the social council with the union committee, and giving the unions a role in the worker cooperative is something I think that we're very, very interested in taking on board. And so we are currently working with the trade unions here in the UK to introduce this model and to see to what extent the unions would be prepared to join us in promoting this and making it part of our whole economic and social strategy, which people have come to know as the Preston model.
So what I'm getting is that in 2008, things like here in the U.S. went downhill in terms of economy. It went downhill in Britain. And with Brexit, it's even made it worse. And so people are in bad shape in Britain. And so folks decided they want to take matters on their own. They want to create wealth for laborers, for everyday people. And one way of doing that is through creating co-ops, in this case, worker-owned co-ops. And you can create social wealth and financial wealth. We're going to have to take our first break. This is going too quickly. And we'll come back and find out what Mr. Pat Conaty is doing with Co-ops UK, and then get more into, mentioned several times, the structure of governance. And I want to get into that and how education fits, because Dr. Julian Manley, I understand you're an educator too, not only a cooperator, but an educator. So we'll be right back and take on some of these other subjects.
Washington, D.C.'s News Talk, 1450 AM WO and 95.9 FM.
Welcome back, everybody. This is Vernon Oaks. We have three guests on the line with us this morning. We're talking about what's going on in the U.S. as it relates to unions and cooperatives and how that information is being shared going across the water. And this program is being sponsored by the National Cooperative Bank, whose mission is to support and be an advocate for America's cooperatives and their members, especially in low-income communities, by providing innovative financial and related services. And what we talked about before we took the break was things have gotten pretty bad in the UK, and looking at a way of getting people to have wealth is merging the co-ops with the unions. So let's hear from Mr. Pat Conaty.
Hello, Vernon. Hello, everyone.
So what is Co-ops UK, and what are you all doing there, and how does that interact with what Dr. Manley is doing at the Preston Cooperative Development Network?
Yeah, good question. Cooperatives UK is the national federation of all cooperatives and mutuals in the UK and all countries, Northern Ireland, Scotland, Wales, England. So we're the federal body, and like in the USA, there's been this massive compression of living standards of people since the crash. In fact, since 2009, the average wages have been repressed more than they've dropped more in real terms than they have ever dropped since 1850. So a massive amount of low-paid in-work poverty. Jobs have increased, but really the types of jobs that are being created are mostly precarious jobs, casualized jobs, people have creating their own work in self-employment. Self-employment has become, exponential growth really since 2009 because the public sector squeeze means that government isn't hiring, and in the private sector increasingly with digitalization and automation, jobs are being made redundant, and so casualized work, self-employed work, zero-hour contracts has become the typical type of new work, sadly. So Cooperatives UK began looking at how we might address this, and specifically in 2014-15, we began talking to the trade unions and to cooperative organizations about what services they provide for self-employed people or for otherwise precariously employed people. And it was very interesting because there was a lot of similarity between some of the services that different unions were providing and some of the innovations that co-ops were leading on. And in some cases we found, for example, in areas where workers are in trade unions and they've almost always been self-employed, like musicians, actors, journalists. There are cases, certainly in the case of the actors and the journalists, where in the case of the actors, there's 25 actor co-ops, a national network, and they work closely with their union equity, hand in glove. So the union does certain services around collective bargaining, advocacy, representation, legal advice, and the co-op does other services around providing for self-employed people to find work and basically to up their skills and so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. The musicians union then copied that system, which the actors set up in the 1980s. And so musicians union has assisted 12 musicians co-ops to set up in different regions of the country. And that's been tried in other areas as well, but it's still at the margins of the mainstream union movement. So we looked further afield, and we found some very interesting, just over the water in France and also in Belgium, we found some very interesting co-ops that are called business and employment co-ops, where if you're self-employed, you can actually join the co-op and get the equivalent of being in work. So you can get access to benefits. If you're unemployed, you can you lose your job, you can get access to unemployment insurance. They provide advice and education. They provide shared working spaces. And in Belgium, one particular model that started by two filmmakers 20 years ago in Brussels is now, it started as a mutual. It's recently become a co-op, but they have 80,000 people they're supporting.
Wow.
And a growing number of workspaces across Belgium. Now, that's called SMART, and but it's not a union, but it's a co-op initiative. It's a co-op in innovation. But, for example, what they do is you join SMART, and they will, collect your debts. They'll do the invoicing. You just give them the information. They'll do the invoicing. They will pay you within 7 days. So they keep your actually cash flow going. They provide insurance. They provide education. They provide access to a range of services, equipment. Very interesting. But it's for any freelancer can actually join SMART. They've also expanded to other European countries. They're now working in about 5 other European countries with another 20,000 members. So we introduced SMART to one of the unions here called Community, which is the old Iron and Steelworkers Union, and which changed their name now to Community. And they were fascinated by this concept. And then we got the interest of a worker space member called IndieCube here in Wales. I'm based in Wales, although they work for Co-ops UK, with 35 workspaces, and got the union and this workspace organization that's a co-op talking, and they're now seeing if they can develop a joint offering, which they're testing at the moment, to freelancers to join both Community Union and also IndieCube, the co-op, with the shared working spaces. So that's the sort of thing that where we've taken our work so far. But we then, in doing this work, came across the work of Union Co-ops UK and USA and said, well, gosh, that's a fantastic model, the Mondragon model. Could we enhance what we're thinking about for precarious workers and pursue that as well? So, that's where we've taken it. We've done a report in 2017 for the Trade Union Congress, which is the equivalent of the AFL-CIO, with a number of case studies. That's been positively received. And really a few months ago, we had our first meeting with 8 trade union groups across the UK. We've now got a steering group going. We're having our next meeting next week. So, we're getting cracking on this, but it's still very early days in terms of following on from the work of the union co-op initiatives in Cincinnati and other cities. So we're quite excited about the partnership possibilities across the Atlantic.
Well, I'm excited just listening to you about all of the possibilities of helping everyday people, folks
Absolutely.
that could not get help on their own, people coming together. And that's why I love this co-op model, and Michael Peck has become a brother in this work.
Yes, sir. Yes,
so,
sir.
It does not surprise me that not only is he doing this in Cincinnati and other places in the U.S., but now looking at taking it overseas and giving this knowledge. And one of the things I like about co-ops, I've taught for 12 years, Dr. Manley, and I love teaching and watching people get it, is that training is in the center of what the co-ops are all about. And this paper I read says that starting with education, the Mondragon way. So who would like to tell me what the Mondragon way is?
Well, I think we should let Julian do that, because Julian is first of all, he's the professor on our team, on our transatlantic team, and also he has actually taught and worked at Mondragon.
Oh, great. Julian.
Yeah, okay. Well, I mean, I think one of the most important lessons to learn from the history of Mondragon is that it took them 13 years of education before they created their first co-op. And when you consider what they've achieved now, it's hard to go back in time and imagine that they had this 13-year hiatus where what they were doing was learning about co-ops, learning about cooperative values, linking those values to religious ideas of working together and in community and for the common good, learning technical and business skills. And it took them 13 years. They set up a technical college, and it was 13 years before they created the first co-op. And I think the lesson to learn from that is that when we talk about creating a co-op, we're not talking about a simple quick fix. You could just set up a co-op and just say, well, off you go. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about a system that transforms the way people behave with each other, the way people interact, that encourages people to engender tolerance and respect, to understand what citizenship and empowerment is, to participate in a democracy, to take responsibility for decisions rather than waiting for some faceless boss to tell people what to do. And all of that is a social, emotional, and psychological transformation as much as it is of economic benefit. So we've taken that on board in Preston. And, in Preston, it's about co-ops, but it's about all sorts of things which come with the creation of co-ops, and education's one of them.
Dr. Manley, Dr. Manley, we have to take our next break, and I don't want to stop you, but we've got to take it. So we'll come right back and talk more about this as soon as on the other side of the break. Please don't touch that dial.
Washington, D.C.'s News Talk, 1450 AM WOM and 95.9 FM.
Welcome back, everybody. This is Vernon Oaks. The program is Everything Cooperative, and we have Mr. Michael Peck, Mr. Pat Conaty, and Dr. Julian Manley on the line with us today. And what's already become clear in this first half an hour, gentlemen, is that I could have spent an hour or two talking to each one of you individually. So.
That's right. That's right. Vernon, can I jump in here for a second?
Okay.
So first of all, you can see the talent that we have in the UK. I mean, that's so apparent. And also what we're able to do is we now have this learning process where we're learning from everywhere to anywhere. From the center, which really, I guess, for our movement is Mondragon, but back to the peripheries, and then from the peripheries back to what we have multiplying centers like Preston and Cincinnati and New York City. Your interview last week with Deputy Mayor Phil Thompson, who's also fully involved with our union co-op model. So I just think that this is so exciting, this transatlantic union co-op, really hybrid model bridge that we're seeing in action.
I'm extremely excited, gentlemen, and wanted to spend a little bit more time talking about this education piece. Dr. Jessica Gordon-Nimhart, in her book Collective Courage, said that in the black experience here in the U.S., it all started with the education. That's what I heard Dr. Julian Manley talking about. Is it starts with the education, and that's why 90% of worker co-ops or co-ops that get started are still in business after 5 years, where in the normal capitalistic model, only about 10% are still in existence after 5 years. It's this education piece. And I would really love it, Dr. Manley, if you could come over maybe with Mike and teach our Congress and senators and White House this thing of tolerance and respect and responsibility you were talking about. What would it be like if everybody had these skill sets?
That's a great idea.
You need a cooperative White House.
Yeah, yes. So what I wanted to get to is this humanity at work under Mondragon White. What is that? Humanity at work.
Julian, you want to start?
Well, humanity at work is the Mondragon motto, and I think it's a very good summary of what they do in 3 words.
Hello?
I think we might have lost Julian.
Do you want me to pick up, or?
Yeah, please. Sure, Pat, go ahead.
Well, hopefully he'll reconnect. Right. Just an interesting example. When we had our meeting in November with the co-ops and the unions, what we're trying to do is actually bring the 2 parties together and get them to find the common ground. I mean, in the past, here, certainly before the First World War, a lot of workers, active workers, were members of co-ops and unions at the same time. But the 2 movements have diverged really a lot in the last century, and we're trying to reconnect them again. And one of the issues for me was that, for example, when we did the research about what unions are doing for the self-employed or the precarious worker and what the co-ops are doing, and compared and contrast and tried to see where the cross-correlation was. One big area, for example, if you're precariously in work, is it's very difficult to get housing. Because your pattern of work, if you're self-employed, your income is up and down, and a lot of people just don't want to take you on. A lot of landlords don't want to take you on. So there's a huge opportunity for not only providing workspace, as like organizations like the Smart Co-op in Belgium does, and IndieCube in Wales does, but also to provide housing and workspace. So the co-op movement can actually become a big player on that side as well. And the unions and the co-ops can say, well, look, how do we bring these different services together? Because we're really about meeting needs. In this increasing workforce, is losing employment rights, as people outsource and privatization increases, public sector jobs decrease. A lot of the union strength is still in the public services, as you know, both here and in the U.S. So we began looking at models in Italy as well, where, for example, in the 1970s, they began experimenting with social cooperatives for social care, for example, for community health, for people leaving prison. How do we get them a job? Experimenting with these worker co-ops and also multi-stakeholder co-ops that could involve family members as well in the co-op. And they've increased since the 80s from 1,000 in 1989 to 23,000 in Italy, worker or social cooperatives. And they've done that through public policy that they've been able to change with laws that favor the development of worker co-ops, or for firms to convert from, a family business into a worker co-op. The Italian system allows for that transition to happen. There's been also a law in 1991 for social cooperatives in care, in education, in public service, in community health services, which achieved in 1991 a national trade union agreement with the Italian trade unions to support this development. So this increase to this over 1 million workers in these worker and social co-ops in Italy is not $9 billion in turnover. About half of those co-ops have collective bargaining agreements. So it's really particularly exciting. So we've been talking to some of the public sector unions about how they could get involved in this, to create good paying jobs and good conditions by joining forces. So it's just another example. The last example that I'd like to give is that we met up with a co-op that in the 1980s was in the whole food sector and in logistics, warehousing, and so on, called SUMA. And they were a successful worker co-op, and they were looking to find a trade union that they could actually join forces with. They struggled, but eventually they got the bakers union involved. So they've been actually running a worker co-op model, a union co-op model, since 1986 successfully. Wow. Now, that particular worker co-op has got over 200 members. It does distribution across England and Wales, and also does some work overseas. And it's kind of a very interesting organization. And when we told the story from one of the workers at our meeting, their jaws dropped because he said, "Look, our combined benefits for our worker owners is $37,000 a year in an industry where the average is $19,000 in combined benefits."
Pat, let me make sure I got this.
They have a flat pay structure. Everyone gets equal pay. We met up with a co-op that in the 1980s was in the whole food sector and in logistics, warehousing, and so on, called SUMA. And they were a successful worker co-op, and they were looking to find a trade union that they could actually join forces with. They struggled, but eventually they got the bakers union involved. So they've been actually running a worker co-op model, a union co-op model, since 1986 successfully. Wow. Now, that particular worker co-op has got over 200 members. It does distribution across England and Wales, and also does some work overseas. And it's kind of a very interesting organization. And when we told the story from one of the workers at our meeting, their jaws dropped because he said, "Look, our combined benefits for our worker owners is $37,000 a year in an industry where the average is $19,000 in combined benefits."
Pat, let me make sure I got this.
They have a flat pay structure. Everyone gets equal pay. So actually the distribution of that across their workforce means that everyone actually doubles their income just by the way they've run the co-op. Really interesting. I mean, the Bakers Union has said, "Look, we've been working with this co-op for 20 years. We think it's fantastic."
So they've been working with the co-op and with the union. Okay, the union combined, but this 37,000 versus 19,000
in combined benefits. That's obviously wages plus benefits and things like that. It's the roll up of the combined salary and benefits that they take basically.
Is that 37,000 pounds?
Pounds.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah. So. But what's interesting is that the operational model that have been developed by the United Steelworkers and Michael and the network in the USA, they've been operating that way with basically the union committee replacing the social council in the model, and the worker board and all that, the whole U.S. model. They've been working that way since 1986 in growing the model. But it was just we didn't know it was there, and it just came out of the research.
So I want to go to the Preston motto where it says the second thing is to tell a good story. That's one of the reasons we have this show, is to tell some of these stories that are just so exciting about how people come together, work together, and they get individual wealth, but also community wealth.
Share the wealth.
Yes. Fascinating. Okay. Yeah. Pat, it says in one of these documents that I read that you are trying to double the number of co-ops in the UK. And what I get for Co-op UK is sort of like NCBA here, National Co-op Business Association, a national arm.
Right. Okay. That's our brother or sister organization. Yeah.
Okay. Yep. So you're going to try to double the amount of co-ops in the UK?
Yeah. We published a book called The Cooperative Advantage in 2015, where we looked at 15 industries. Education. We looked at agriculture. We looked at housing. We looked at health, manufacturing, the fishery, all these different industrial sectors. And we looked at cooperative innovation that was happening and how it would be possible with a national strategy to get behind that to double the size of the cooperative economy in the UK. Now, of course, Rochdale pioneers, most people know in 1844, the Rochdale Principles, Rochdale and Greater Manchester. But actually, compared to other countries in Europe, the cooperative sector is relatively small, so it counts for 2% of gross domestic product. Whereas in Italy, for example, and I gave you the example of the worker and social co-ops in Italy, it's 10% of GDP. In one region alone in Italy, Emilia-Romagna, where they've had this amazing development of cooperatives, the cooperative sector accounts for 37% of the regional economy in terms of turnover. Right. So what we tried to do in the 2015 book is to look at, in those different sectors, how we could develop strategies for those sectors to raise our game. And so the book impressed the Labour Party, and the Labour Party recently has come on board to commit, if they get elected into the next government, when that ever happens, to want to help us as a movement, Co-operatives UK and the co-op movement, to double the size within one term of government, to go from 2% of GDP to 4% of GDP. And they've recently produced a report on ways to do that. One interesting way that they've identified in the book, or in the report, was that every year some 40,000 small businesses change hands. Right. The owner of the business, if his family business, retires and often sells the business, or sometimes, it just gets, what they're like, the succession problem issue. And the trouble is that the existing legislation favors not worker co-ops, but employee share ownership plans, that kind of thing, which actually are often used for management buyouts rather than worker buyouts. So one of the big problems here is that the worker co-op model is discriminated against in the existing legislation. And one of the problems is that if you sell to a worker co-op, the seller, the owner of the family that's selling, has to pay 20% plus in capital gains tax. But with the employment share ownership plan model, they don't have to pay that because they can put it into a trust. So it's a real impediment to worker co-op development. So if we could only convert of those 40,000 businesses 5% a year into worker co-ops, we could easily double the size of the co-op movement within 4 years. Okay. So that's just one way. Now, if all of those could be union co-ops as well, just think about that.
Well, the Labor Party you mentioned, I just want to quick for the people here that we have the Republican and the Democratic are the main two parties, and then Independent. So what are the parties in the UK? Labor Party is one. What's the other one?
Conservative.
Well, the two main ones. So the nearest to the Democratic Party would be the Labor Party, and of course nearest to the Republican Party would be the Conservative Party. Okay. And the Conservative Party is in power at the moment, just like the Republicans are in power, and at least in the U.S. Right.
So if the Labor Party gets in, Democrats get in, then you could see this happening better. They would more likely embrace this union cooperative model and get the laws in place.
Yeah, but they've also committed to things like the Preston model that Julian can talk more about, because that's about community wealth building, which at the local level, at the city level, or the town level, could be hugely transformative in terms of tackling poverty and the housing crisis and also low pay.
All right, we're going to take our final break. When we come back, I know the first principle is volunteer and open membership. Who are the people you're talking about? Let's still bring it right on. Who's benefiting and who has the need? We'll be right back. Please don't touch that dial.
Washington, D.C.'s News Talk, 1450 AM WOM and 95.9 FM.
Information is power, and that's why WOL makes a great partner for this program, Everything Co-op. But, I found out, and we were told the first week we were on about 5 years ago, that it's not information that's power. It's the action that you use the information. You got to sort of strike the match, and that striking the match is going into action. And Dr. Manley is back online. Thank you, Dr. Manley, for coming back. And we have...
Hello. Sorry about that.
Oh, that's technology. Pat Conaty and Michael Peck are on with us. So I wanted to talk about the first principle is volunteer open membership. And when you're talking about folks that are in bad shape in the UK, who are these people that you're helping with? What's their demographics? Dr. Manley or Pat?
Pat, you can answer that?
Yeah.
Well, certainly. I mean, I suppose the issue for us in terms of the freelance co-op models that I described, the one in Belgium and also the other ones, they're still coming at things from a very low base. And I think one of the issues for us is really what is the best organizing strategy? Because the trade unions themselves really are finding that their model of collective bargaining, which worked for bigger organizations for a long time since the Great Depression, in this market where people are actually increasingly, hard to reach, working on their own in isolation, working in poverty. I mean, research shows that 83% of precarious workers are in poverty. Self-employed people working in casualized labor, 85% of them are in poverty. That wasn't the case 10 years ago. So it's a question of how can the organizing model reach out to them and bring them in? And I think that's really where I think there aren't any quick answers.
But Pat, my question is, what's the gender like? What's the racial makeup? What's the political or religious background? I know it's all people. But these 85% of the folks in this group are in poverty. But what do they look like? What's the story? Who are they?
The self-employment pattern has changed in the last 10 years. So, for example, increasingly those people who are in precarious employment, of course, are either women and also ethnic minorities. And that trend is just. I don't have exactly the figures of the breakdown, but the figures I've seen in terms of gender has been, the women in self-employment has massively increased since 2009. I mean, it used to be well under 50%, but now it's actually increasing, considerably. So, and that trend continues to grow. So in terms of the demographic, we're talking about the poorest people of all colors, really, in the country, are in this situation, either zero-hour contracts, people working in different parts of the gig economy, people facing automation because their jobs, are being kind of automated out of existence. These are people increasingly at the sharp end, and also the further you go north in the country, the more the precarious work, is greater than it is obviously in other places like in London, where the economy, has been. I mean, the housing crisis in London is huge, but the economy has been doing better than, let's say, here in Wales or Northern Ireland or Liverpool, and further, in different parts of the country. The regions have been suffering really badly.
And so you're seeing this union cooperative model coming in and helping all of these people that are marginalized, no matter what they look like.
Ways, absolutely. I mean, we were. My colleague Cilla Ross went to the Union Co-op conference in Cincinnati and was really impressed with what she saw there from the community grassroots organizing of union co-ops. So unions and co-ops are actually designed from the get-go to be the model. And, that's something that we would like to pursue here. It's a very interesting achievement in different cities in the United States, and the work that Michael's been doing with his colleagues in the different 10 cities.
Yeah, and if I can chip in here, Vernon,
Mm-hmm.
I think that one of the issues in Britain with Brexit, in terms of demographic and in terms of work, has been that people have been blaming immigrants, and that probably resonates with you in the United States. People have been blaming immigrants, and by immigrants, they mean people of color, whether they're immigrants or not. They've been blaming immigrants for stealing their jobs and things of that nature. And although this is patently false, it is a reality of the atmosphere. And we think in Preston that working cooperatively, encouraging people from different ethnic groups, different communities, in my case within Preston, to work cooperatively will actually take away the fear and the blame and the falsehood of that kind of attitude. And in that respect, working cooperatively post-Brexit, if Brexit ever happens, will be a way of trying to ensure that we don't fall into that xenophobic trap, and to help people to work together at work democratically and therefore in community as well. And the university is helping the communities in Preston to try to understand the connection between working together ethnically in communities and the way of working cooperatively in businesses. So we have a couple of research projects. One is my own, which works with the cooperatives, and another one is belongs to colleagues who are working directly with communities. And we're working to make sure that those two research projects actually become and merge into one in the future. So working cooperatively, working with cooperative businesses can do a lot of good to change that kind of poisonous atmosphere that we have here at the moment.
It's interesting. It's poison and false. That's which have to get at it here. If you say, yeah, we know it here. It's poisonous and it's false. And it hinders progress. It hinders this creativity, this innovation. So, Mike, what else do you have on the slate? You seem to be doing a lot, buddy.
No. Thank you, Vernon. As you can see, when you get to hang around people like Julian and Pat and Phil Ross and Ed Mayo in the UK, your whole game gets lifted up, and I'm really grateful for this collaboration. Also, Ivan Zugasti of Mondragon and our teams in New York City and Cincinnati. Just a couple of points. Pat mentioned SMART, and the correspondent to SMART would be our freelancers union here in the United States, started by the one and only Sarah Horowitz and now led by Caitlin Pierce. They have over 350,000 members in the U.S., very similar to SMART. The other point to the politics of what's happening here is we all know about Senator Gillibrand last August Main Street Employee Ownership Act, which was bipartisan legislation in this incredibly polarized moment, the most polarized moment in our recent political history in the U.S. We managed to get a bipartisan piece of legislation on advancing the cause of worker and employee ownership, the best of its kind in the last 2 decades. So I think that's really a secret of the kind of success that we can have on a bipartisan basis. And the other thing is hybrid models. The union co-op is a hybrid model, and as Julian suggested, and as Pat has shown, hybrid is the key, especially for countries like the U.S. that are based on immigrants and immigrant histories, and the transformative fact that in the U.S. 12% of our population are immigrants, but 24% of the patents. I mean, clearly it's the creative comparative advantage, and hybrid models go hand in hand with the localization of experiences like Mondragon, like Emilia-Romagna, like what's happening at Preston and Cincinnati. Localizing these experiences allow you to go across geographic boundaries and create templates that are reusable and recyclable and continuously applicable, once they've been customized. So I think, once again, your radio show and our cooperative movement is about cooperating, and you can see the advantages that accrue to all of us when we reach out and do that.
Yep. It's fascinating. We only have another minute and a half or so, so anybody have a last comment on what you want to leave the listeners with?
Well, there's one issue that we haven't talked about, Vernon, and that is the issue of investment. There really does need to be investment into these projects. One of the main things that made Mondragon also successful was that they had their own bank right at the center of the cooperative system. There is work in New York and also here in Wales and also in Manchester and Bristol to develop regional cooperatives, to actually invest in the regional cooperative economies. Mondragon had a regional bank, and he set it up in 1956, and it's actually helped develop the opportunities for humanity at work. So I think really we do need to get the kind of social investment side right.
Right.
And the emergence of discussions about public banks and regional cooperative banks could actually help us solve that problem.
We have to cut it off here, and humanity at work really means that labor is sovereign, that capital is subordinate to and supportive of labor. But labor is the key. I got it.
Amen.
Absolutely.
Thank you guys very much. We'll want to cycle back and probably get one of you on for the hour, each of you. Thank you very much for taking the time, and everybody out there, please have a cooperative week. Live cooperatively, and let's get some of this training so we have a better world.
95.9 FM.